The world is an amazing place, but we have three big environmental problems and we need to understand them and work together to solve them. These problems are global heating, direct damage to the living planet, and pollution. Together, these three problems hurt nature, and that's a huge problem because nature is what keeps the living planet habitable. If nature becomes unhealthy, the world will no longer be a comfortable home for organic life, including human life. The biggest thing hurting nature is global heating, because nothing likes it too hot. The second biggest thing hurting nature is direct damage to the living planet. Sadly, sometimes nature gets hurt directly from what we do, and this is also a problem. The third biggest thing hurting nature is pollution. Pollution is a kind of poison, and nothing can live comfortably in a poisoned world, including humans. Too many injuries will make nature unhealthy, and this might hurt us, really badly indeed. So we need to stop heating up the world, stop polluting the world, and stop direct damage to the world. Instead, we need to cool the world, clean the world, and help nature to help itself. So let's look at these problems in more detail and how we can fix them. But before we do that, we need to look at what we mean by the living planet and how the living planet actually works. The world is an ecosystem, a natural living system. Everything living and non-living has an effect on it. But humans and other living creatures have some of the biggest effects of all. All the living things that make up the Earth make it a living planet, and we are part of that. We can imagine this living planet as Mother Earth. Planets and moons and stars are not living planets the way that Earth is. On Earth, the trees breathe oxygen that feed us through our lungs, and we breathe CO2 back at them, and this feeds them through their leaves. The sun also feeds plants directly, as do dead plants and animals when they go back to the earth. We can imagine that in this sealed jar of earth, plants and worms, called a terrarium. The plants in the terrarium breathe out what the worms and bugs need, and the worms and bugs breathe out what the plants need. So it's life itself that keeps the gases in balance, everything living for itself and for each other too. Did you know that the oldest terrarium has been sealed shut for 40 years, and that all the oxygen on Earth was made by plants, including plants living in the sea? All living things, animals, plants, bugs, worms, fish, trees, mosses, fungi, frogs, and people, feed each other in similar ways, through the air and through the earth. In fact, by living and dying, by breathing and eating and working, we and all the other living things help make the air, and we make the soil that covers the earth. Rocks and clays and water and gases are important too, but sometimes people forget how important living things, feeding each other in the earth and making air, are for the world. This is why we call it the living world, our Mother Nature. So what's the problem with Mother Nature? Why is she getting so hot? And what can we do about that? The world is covered with a blanket, a transparent blanket made of water vapor, as well as the gases nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and methane. This blanket, the atmosphere, keeps Mother Earth the right temperature, not too cold and not too hot. The materials that this blanket is made of, the proportion of each thing inside it, is really important. Too little of the gases carbon dioxide and methane, and the world would be too cold. But with too much of these gases, the world will become too hot. One of the most important things in this blanket, the atmosphere, is carbon. And that is what living things like trees are mostly made of. A lump of coal is 3/4 carbon. A tree is more than half carbon. And even humans have carbon in them too. About 18% as shown, though it's spread around. Usually carbon goes from the air to living things to the ground and then back into the air again. Some of the carbon in trees and other living things gets buried deep underground or sinks to the bottom of the sea. But when volcanoes explode and rocks erode, more carbon is released into the atmosphere, so the total amount remains roughly the same. This is called the carbon cycle. The problem starts if too much of the carbon buried underground comes into the air too quickly, or if too much of it gets buried under the ground. If too much carbon gets buried underground and taken out of the Earth's blanket, the atmosphere, the world can become too cold. This is thought to have happened 50 million years ago when a huge bloom of a water plant called a zola pulled CO2 out of the atmosphere and then buried it on the bottom of the sea when it died and sank. This event is a good example of how life and the atmosphere are connected, just like in a terrarium. So, if a huge pile of buried carbon gets dug up and burned and turned into a gas, then Mother Nature's blanket can get too hot. This could kill plants, and with fewer plants, there would be fewer and fewer oxygen-breathing animals and organisms of all kinds. Because this is happening now, we need to understand it better. Then we can prevent it, then we can also fix it. So we dig up rocks with carbon in them, and these rocks are called coal. They used to be trees, but when they got squashed and heated, they turned into coal, and they burn even better than wood when they're coal. So we burn coal to make electricity, and this is a very useful thing, apart from the overheating problem. One of the best ways to fix this problem is not dig up and burn coal, but to make electricity from windmills and solar panels instead. To leave that old carbon, which is in the coal, in the ground. To not add too much of it to the atmosphere, to Mother Nature's blanket. There is also a liquid with carbon in it that's also in the ground. That's called oil, and we burn that to make our cars and planes and trucks go. Again, when we burn it, the carbon inside it rises into the atmosphere, Mother Earth's blanket, and this also contributes to making it too hot. One of the best ways to fix this problem is to drive electric cars, trucks and planes, and make sure that the electricity they run on is made from windmills and solar panels. You can tell an electric car doesn't put carbon into the atmosphere because it has no smoky exhaust pipe. Finally, there's a gas underground called methane, and that has carbon in it. Sometimes it's called natural gas. We burn that gas for electricity too and for cooking. Sadly, once again, burning that gas puts its carbon into the atmosphere. Too much carbon, all at the same time, makes Mother Earth's blanket too hot, and that's bad for the weather and bad for life. One of the best ways to fix this problem is, again, to use windmills or solar panels to make electricity, and to use electricity instead of gas for everything, including for cooking. So that old carbon which is in the ground, in the coal and in the methane in oil, we need to leave that there and not put it into the atmosphere. So we have to stop burning these fuels. If we keep burning them, there'll be too much carbon in the air, which is Mother Earth's blanket, and she will get too hot. And when she gets too hot, the extra heat will make living things die at a faster rate than they are being born. And with less living things to regulate the atmosphere, Mother Earth will get very sick indeed. Thanks for listening to and watching part 1. In the next section, we'll see how we sometimes damage the Earth directly, and we will have a look at pollution.